Hey, hey, hey! Welcome to my cozy corner of the internet. This is Nephilim VA bringing you the 38th chapter of Inheritance, written by A's for Amy 71 on AO3. The Endeavor Agency. Everyone there seems to have big personalities, except from Todoroki, of course. What will Izuku learn? Let's find out, but first, the trigger warnings. This fan fiction is for mature audiences with canon-typical violence and a trigger warning for major character death. If that isn't your style, then I recommend Shades of Green, which is written by Maybe As Friendly on AO3. It can be found on my channel. Canon Divergence is the name of the game and indulges the what-ifs of Midoriya Izuku having a quirk. With that being said, the chapter summary is as followed. Izuku does some training with a couple of burnin sidekickers. Now I implore you to sit back and relax whilst I read to you. Chapter 38. Burnin hadn't been kidding when she said she would come at him. 1 second, she was smiling at him, and the next, she was hurling flames at him by gripping the ends of her flaming hair and using them as weapons. Izuku dodged the first volley of attacks with some simple gymnastics. He was thankful for the fire-retardant qualities of his costume, though, when she landed a hit to his leg. The impact made the flames seem to splash, almost like liquid, and he feared for a moment that the flames might actually be lava or some sort of flammable liquid. The flames extinguished themselves and he breathed a sigh of relief, even as he was forced to keep dodging. The speed of her attack was impressive, and she advanced on him as if she wanted to drive him into a corner. When dodging and trying to advance on her didn't get him anywhere, he levitated to the ceiling and crawled over the tiles, glad they were reinforced to withstand the pressure he put on them. He scrambled to get over her head, but she proved to be quick on her feet as well. "You can float, huh?" she said with a smile. "Pretty useful quirk. I thought it was super strength." He could see how she might think that due to his performance at the sports festival, but if she didn't know about his levitation, what else didn't she know about him? Not that she would be impressed by his transparency or knowing that she really wanted to have a cupcake for a snack. He simply had to keep trying things until he found something that worked. He finally let himself drop to the floor again and charged up one for all. Green sparks webbing around him. "Interesting trick," Burnin said, staying on the balls of her feet and keeping her eyes glued to Izuku. "Is that for distraction?" Before she could blink, Izuku had already thrown her over his shoulder onto the floor and was holding her immobile with his own body. He easily forced her to flip over and put her wrists together behind her. He held them in place with one gloved hand while he used pull to summon restraints from a pouch on his hip. From there, he was able to secure her, leaving her unable to reach her hair while he also secured her ankles. "Hold on! You have 2 quirks? 3? She squawked indignantly. 13, actually, Izuku said with a grin at the flabbergasted look on her face. 13? That's crazy. No one has that many quirks, she said, squirming against her bonds. I do, he corrected. So, does this round go to me? Yeah, she said grumpily. You win this time. Izuku took a moment to release Burnin, who rubbed her wrist and scowled before hopping to her feet. What the heck, kid? Your moves are crazy good. Izuku grinned before admitting, I trained with pro heroes on and off since I was 10. The temperature in the room was noticeably colder now than it had been before, and now they could see their breaths on the frigid air. Seems like Shoto's using his ice next door, Burnin observed. Izuku raised his eyebrows at that. These walls were undoubtedly thick. How much ice would Shoto have to be putting out to chill adjacent rooms to this extent? Burnin's hair seemed to become fuller around her head and burn a little brighter, possibly to compensate for the temperature change. Izuku was about to question her further, but there was a loud beeping coming from the closed door. Burnin strode over and unlocked the door, which slid open to reveal Shoto and a man wrapped in bandages everywhere there might have been exposed skin. He wore a flak jacket and gloves, and Izuku surmised that this must be Kido, who Burnin had mentioned earlier. "Change of plans," Kido said as he moved into the room. "The other room is now an ice cube, so I think it would be a good idea to combine into one group." Shoto didn't show the slightest bit of emotion when all eyes turned to him at the words ice cube. He simply followed Kido into the room and looked around. "Fine by me," Burnin said. "It's a little early, but we were planning on doing that anyway." Izuku soon learned that Shoto found it harder to maneuver his ice when there was another person he had to avoid freezing. The power behind his ice quirk was incredibly strong, but Shoto didn't have the finesse to craft anything with it. He could control how much he produced, and he could produce it incredibly quickly, but he couldn't make it do much else. Izuku tried to stay out of Shoto's way, but Kido had a quirk that allowed him to change the direction of anything in motion, including people. It was harder to stay still while Burnin threw flames at them with lightning speed, but it was even harder to move when they kept getting whipped around in odd directions, often into the path of flames, ice, or each other. "You cover me from Burnin for a minute," Izuku told Shoto after the second time they'd collided with each other. They'd been getting led around by the nose for at least half an hour by this time, and he was getting worn down. Shoto nodded and forced his attention on Burnin, who kept herself in motion and difficult to freeze. Izuku allowed himself to levitate to the ceiling, ignoring the way he skidded across the ceiling tiles as Kido directed his motion like a conductor directed a symphony. When friction did its job and Izuku came to a stop, he braced his feet and back before charging up one for all and using pull on Kido. Not knowing how well it would work, Izuku put as much power as he could into it, and was rewarded with a very undignified shriek as both Burnin and Kido shot towards Izuku. This was tricky, because he needed to avoid pulling Shoto as well. Before they could reach him, he had to let go of pull and let them drop. "Shoto! Now!" Izuku called out as the two were falling. Shoto stepped forward and sent ice out to catch their opponents, encasing them. Izuku crab walked sideways to avoid the ice jutting up below him before he dropped down to the floor and walked over to the captives. "Nice work," Izuku told Todoroki with a small smile. Both boys were a little worse for wear, with scrapes and bruises that would surely surface soon from all of their collisions with the walls, floor, and each other. Not to mention the burns. "You too," Todoroki said, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand to find his lip was bleeding. There was a hissing sound as the steam began to erupt from the top of the ice, and Izuku could see a yellow-green glow around Burnin's head. She was using the flames on her head to free herself. They would have needed to be freed anyway, since Todoroki didn't have the capability to wrap the ice in a bubble with air enough to stay stuck for a while without suffocation. It was interesting that there were enough air bubbles in there for her hair to stay lit or reignite. "Nice try, but as long as I have my flames, I can still fight," Burnin said as soon as her head was free. Her hair burned brighter as she emerged more from the ice, and Kido's head was also becoming unstuck, and he took a huge gasp of air as Burnin boosted her flames even more. Izuku counted the pouches on his belt until he found the sixth one, and pulled a pellet about the size of a marble from inside, and flicked it at Burnin's head. The pellet expanded, and then it seemed to sublimate, snuffing out the flames and leaving a powdery residue behind. Shoto actually let out a snort at that, surprising Izuku. What was that? She demanded. First, are we the winners? He asked just to be sure. She looked like she was concentrating on something, maybe trying to reignite her hair, before Kido spoke up. You win. Just get me out of this ice. I'm gonna freeze to death. Izuku nodded in acceptance and slammed the heel of his hand against the ice, causing it to shatter and fall away in chunks. Both heroes were visibly shivering, and Shoto walked over to raise a hand and radiate heat to warm and dry them a bit. That stings, Kido complained, shaking his hands and jogging in place to increase circulation. What did you do to my hair? Burnin demanded again. Quick snuff pellet, Izuku said, holding up another for her to examine. When it comes in contact with intense heat, it'll explode into a fire-extinguishing powder. At this size, it'll put a normal-sized human out if they're on fire, or small blaze of any other kind. Since I found out that one of my classmates had a fire quirk, I decided it would be worth it to keep a supply on hand. So, it'll wash out? She asked, sounding more annoyed than worried. It should. If it doesn't, let me know and I'll ask the person who gave them to me, Izuku answered. He guessed he should have asked Sir about that to begin with, but would be happy to report how well they'd work the next time they met. For now, he was sure that Sir had his hands full with the 3 interns he'd taken on this year. Well, I'd say that even though this training session didn't go as planned, the end result was good. You two discovered that making a plan and working together is the best way to tackle a problem that's too big for a single person, Burnin said, sounding satisfied. And we learn not to underestimate interns, just because you're only first years, Kido said, still shivering. Burnin, I need to hit the showers, so you two have some free time until your next round of training. You should take the opportunity to check out the facilities and find your way to the bullpen on the 2nd floor. That's where calls come in requesting heroes, and we get dispatched based on what's needed. Shoto nodded and turned to walk away. Izuku paused to thank Burnin and Kido for their training, and then jogged to catch up with Todoroki. Have you spent a lot of time here before? As Izuku followed him into the elevator. Not really, Todoroki answered. My father likes it when I show any kind of interest in learning how this place works, so I tend to avoid it. Izuku just stared at him, trying to figure out why he'd shoot himself in the foot like that. I know you don't get along with your father, but that's kind of... He paused to change his wording because he wanted to say dumb. Counterintuitive. You wouldn't understand, Todoroki said flatly. Maybe not the part about your father, but... Do you really want to be a hero? Or is it like your dad's making you? Todoroki thought about that for so long that Izuku was almost sure he was just going to ignore the question. The elevator dinged and the doors slid open to the 2nd floor before he finally answered. I guess it's both. Okay, so why not take what you can from this experience? I mean, he's still the number 2 and knows a lot about the business and how to run an agency. That's valuable knowledge, no matter who you learn it from, right? Izuku shrugged when Todoroki just looked at him for a moment and then continued walking through a set of double doors across the hall from the elevator. The room they entered was a hive of activity. There were people walking around in a hurry and coming in and going out, sometimes even through an open window for those who could fly. There was a small seating area with a few heroes sitting and discussing things to one side, and a wide aisle down the middle of rows of desks pushed together that seemed to make up workspaces for all of the heroes to do their paperwork or await assignment. There was office equipment as well, and aside from the brightly coloured costumes and the sometimes loud conversations, it seemed like any other busy office space. Hey! Aren't you the newbies who were supposed to be training with Burnin and Kido this morning? Someone asked when they were spotted. We finished early, Izuku told the man. This hero was tall and thin and had bushy grey hair. His hero costume was white with grey accents, and he had aviator-type goggles perched on his forehead. "That's odd," the man said with a frown. "Is one of you injured? We have an infirmary." "Huh? Is someone hurt, Mamanga?" another hero asked, looking up with concern. This hero's skin was so dark brown it was nearly black, which was a startling contrast to his yellow eyes. His costume was a one-piece that was bright yellow at the bottom and gradually turned to orange near his waist, then red at the shoulders. He walked over to Izuku and Shoto, also looking concerned. "Your endeavors, kid," he said in recognition. Shoto sighed quietly. "We're interning this week." "Ah, well that explains it. Welcome to the bullpen," he said, his manner turning friendly in an instant. "I'm Rocket." Momonga frowned and looked at Rocket. They were supposed to be training with Burnin and Kido, but they finished early. "Early? Did they have to leave on a call?" "I didn't hear anything about it," Rocket said. "They both needed to shower," Izuku said sheepishly. "I kind of put out Burnin's hair and Kido was frozen in a block of ice." "Twice," Shoto added. Rocket and Momonga burst out laughing. "You put out Burnin's hair," Momonga wheezed. "She's gotta be pretty pissed." Izuku suddenly wondered if he was in trouble. She hadn't seemed super mad, but maybe she hid it well. "Should I be worried?" Izuku asked. "Well, if she didn't strangle you on the spot, I think you'll be okay," Rocket said with a grin. "But she's a spitfire, so be on your toes." "Noted." "Anyway, let me show you around a bit," Rocket offered. "What are your names?" "I'm Vanguard," Izuku said enthusiastically. "Shoto," Todoroki supplied. "You might want something a little more, private," Rocket warned Shoto. "You're bound to become relatively famous because of your roots, if nothing else. Using your first name as a hero name could strip you of a lot of privacy in the future." Shoto blinked slowly and finally nodded when it seemed like Rocket was expecting a response. "Okay, Vanguard and Shoto," he said. "I'm Rocket, as you heard from Momonga here." Momonga waved, then turned back to his desk as his phone rang. "This is the main work and dispatch area for the flaming sidekickers." He spread his arms out to encompass the entire area proudly. "Everyone here has their own desk, since there's a lot of paperwork, well, computer work anyway. Once you get your hero license in a year or two, you'll learn really quickly that bureaucrats love everyone to fill out tons of forms." Rocket moved further into the space and pointed to an area in the far corner. "There's the main switchboard that most calls come through, kind of like police dispatch. Sometimes we're just given an assignment and head out immediately, and other times we take calls to determine what's going on and how we can help." He went on to explain about the different types of jobs they could be called out on, and what they might be likely to run into while on patrol. It was very clear that they were all proud of their work and their status as burnin sidekickers. This building wasn't just a place they worked for many of them, but their home as well. The dormitory housed at least 2/3 of the sidekicks in Endeavor's employ, and many had been with the agency for years. Izuku found it a fascinating concept, and wondered if the new sidekicks and interns were also living in Might Tower. He would have to remember to ask, since it didn't seem likely that he'd been having a nice little chat with Karchan about it once they got back to school. By the time Rocket was showing them the leaderboard by the switchboard, Burnin returned with her hair alight as bright as it had been when Izuku had met her earlier. "Sorry about your hair," Izuku apologized when he saw her. "Never be sorry about an honest victory," she told him. Still, there was a glint in her eye when Rocket looked at her in surprise. "The newbie beat you in a fight?" That turned heads, and there was some murmuring from those nearby. Burnin straightened to her full height and glared.
"Wait until it's your turn to train with them," she said. "Those two are no joke. Shoto's been trained by Endeavor, and Vanguard has moves I certainly didn't have as a first-year student, maybe even as a first-year rookie. They're good, and they're only gonna get better."
Izuku tried to not swell too much with pride and excitement. She could be laying it on thick to save her ego after all. Burnin had Izuku and Todoroki hang around the switchboard for a while to get a feel of how frequently calls came in and what types. Then she told them to wander around and observe what everyone was doing with their time, and to feel free to ask any questions that they had. Izuku went back to talk to Momonga, since he was wondering if his quirk had any relation to his name, which was a type of flying squirrel native to Japan. It turned out that it did, and that the hero was able to manifest wings, similar to the flying squirrel made out of flame between the wrist and the ankle of each side of his body. They had been talking about it for a few minutes when Endeavor strode into the room. Every person in the room stood and bowed politely until he nodded and they all went back to what they were doing. He made eye contact with Izuku and gestured for him to follow, then did the same to Shoto. "You'll be training with me for the next hour," he said as flatly as his son often spoke. "We'll go to my personal dojo." Thank you so much for watching this video. I appreciate all the support you've given me. Lots of new characters! How fun! Training with Endeavor sounds kind of scary, but hopefully everything will work out okay. I can't wait to find out! This week has been kind of rough for me, but I am most definitely grateful for being able to focus the energy I had on creating content. All credits go to the original creator of this fanfiction, A is for Amy71 on AO3. I would highly appreciate it if you gave this video a like and you subscribe to the channel and you hit the notification bell to be notified of my next upload. There is no pressure to do so though. Thank you for visiting my cozy corner of the internet. Keep growing my sunflowers. Mwah!